I bought a new house in the mountains to finally be alone with nature. No noise, no people, just the wind in the treetops. Then my son-in-law called and said, "My parents are moving in with you. If you don't like it, move back to the city." I said nothing, but I left them a surprise that would turn their lives upside down. But before we continue, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love to know how far our stories travel. I spent 42 years working as a head nurse in a Chicago hospital. 42 years of double shifts, missed holidays, and sacrificed weekends. Every dollar saved fed a single dream, an isolated cabin deep in the Appalachian Mountains where silence would be my only company. When I finally signed the deed to that small piece of land at 65, it felt like a 4-decade weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The property was modest, 2 bedrooms, a living room with a stone fireplace, a compact kitchen, and a porch that wrapped around the entire structure. But to me, it was a palace. "Congratulations, Emily," said Michael, the real estate agent, handing me the keys. "You are now officially the owner of 5 acres of peace and quiet." The keys felt heavy in my hand, loaded with promises. I drove to my new home that same afternoon, following increasingly narrow roads until the asphalt gave way to dirt. The cell signal gradually faded, first 4 bars, then 3, 2, 1, until it disappeared completely. Perfect. The cabin appeared after a curve exactly like in the photos, but infinitely more beautiful in person. A red clay roof, stone walls, a sturdy chimney, and nothing around but intense green. I parked the car, put my hands on the steering wheel, and took a deep breath, letting the tears flow freely. I was home finally. The first few weeks were pure bliss. I woke up with the sunrise. I had coffee on the porch, watching colorful toucans and macaws. I walked the property, getting to know every tree, every bush. At night, I sat by the fireplace with a book and a glass of wine while the silence of the forest cradled me. It was exactly as I had dreamed until the phone call came. I had to drive 5 miles to the only spot where the cell phone got a signal because the device had rung while I was in town buying supplies. It was Sarah, my only daughter. "Mom, I'm so glad you answered. We have a serious problem here." Something in her voice made me grip the phone tighter. "What happened?" "Honey, Daniel's parents lost their house. A problem with the bank. Something about late payments. They're going to stay with you for a few months." The shock left me momentarily speechless. Daniel had been my son-in-law for 15 years, a man who always treated me with a polite distance. His parents, David and Linda, were practically strangers to me. "Sarah, I bought this house to be alone. It's small, it only has 2 bedrooms. Mom, they have nowhere to go. They're your granddaughter's grandparents. But Daniel is already arranging their move. They'll arrive next week." I tried to argue to explain that the house wasn't set up for it, that the isolation wasn't suitable for older people with health problems, that I had saved for decades to have this space just for myself. But every objection was met with accusations of selfishness. "Frankly, Mom, I never imagined you could be so insensitive. They're Daniel's parents. They would lose their dignity going to a nursing home." The call ended abruptly, leaving me stunned. I returned to my cabin feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. They hadn't even asked if I would accept. It was an imposition, not a request. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house, touching the walls, looking at the few pieces of furniture I had bought with such care. Each piece had been chosen to complement my dream of peace and simplicity. And now, without my permission, strangers would occupy this space. The next day I received another call, this time from Daniel himself. "Emily, just to confirm, my parents will arrive on Friday. I'll send their things tomorrow." His voice was cold, as if he were talking to an employee, not his wife's mother. "Daniel, wait. We need to talk about this." "I don't have the setup to—" "Look, Emily," he interrupted. "If you don't like the idea, you can just move back to Chicago. The house you sold hasn't found a buyer yet." Those words revealed everything. This wasn't a temporary situation. They wanted my house, my dream, my sanctuary, and they expected me to just give it up. When I hung up the phone, something had changed inside me. The patient and conciliatory nurse I had always been gave way to a woman ready to fight for what was rightfully hers. I would not give up my dream without a fight. I took a notebook and started taking notes. I would not act on impulse or emotion. I would plan every step with the same care and precision I had dedicated to my patients for 4 decades. If they wanted a war, they were challenging the wrong strategist. First, I needed to understand exactly what was happening. Why would Daniel's parents, who always seemed financially stable, have suddenly lost their house? Why was my daughter, who always respected my independence, now pressuring me so intensely? There was more to this story than they were telling me. I drove to the nearest city, Asheville, and settled into a small coffee shop with Wi-Fi. From there, I made a few calls and did some research. Talking to my old neighbor in Chicago, I discovered something revealing. "Emily, you didn't know Daniel lost his job 6 months ago. They sold one of the cars and have been behind on the mortgage payments. Sarah is teaching extra classes to make up for it." This information changed everything. It wasn't just Daniel's parents in trouble, it was the whole family. My cabin wasn't being requested out of need for my in-laws, but likely as an asset that could be sold or used as collateral for loans. Then I called my old colleague Paul, now a lawyer specializing in real estate law. "Emily, legally speaking, no one can force you to host people on your property," he explained. "But family is complicated. Do you have all the deeds in order?" "I have everything, Paul. I saved for decades to buy this house." "Then I suggest 2 things. First, document every communication about this issue. Second, do not leave the property under any circumstances until we talk in person." I thanked him for the advice, and as I sipped my coffee, a plan began to form. I would not abandon my house, but I also wouldn't directly confront my daughter or son-in-law. Instead, I would create a situation where they themselves would give up on the idea. The next morning, I made another trip to Asheville. I visited the small local veterinary clinic and partially explained my situation to Dr. Miller, a kind-looking man who cared for the region's animals. "Emily, I understand your concern. We've actually had problems with snakes in the area this year, especially rattlesnakes. The excessive heat is driving them closer to homes." I left the clinic with a jar of a harmless but quite strong-smelling product used to repel reptiles. I also bought some discarded snake skins that the vet kept for studies. My next stop was the garden store, where I purchased intensely smelly organic fertilizer and some plants known to attract insects. On the way back, I stopped at a hunting and fishing supply store, buying a few small animal traps, the kind used only for live capture without harming them. Back at the cabin, I implemented the first phase of the plan. I sprinkled the snake repellent at strategic points around the house, especially near the guest room and bathroom. I placed the snake skins where they would be easily found, one under the guest room bed, another near the bathroom entrance. In the garden, I planted the insect-attracting species near the windows and spread the fertilizer generously. The smell was strong and unpleasant, but I knew it would diminish in the next few days, lingering just long enough to cause discomfort. The traps were set at strategic points on the perimeter of the house, not to catch animals, but to create the impression that the area was infested with small predators. Finally, I turned off the water heater and reduced the capacity of the filter that supplied the house, ensuring the water came out with a slight brownish tint, perfectly safe to drink, but visually unappealing. When I was done, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, observing my work. There was nothing dangerous or permanent in what I had done. It was just an elaborate setup designed to make their stay uncomfortable enough that they would give up on their own. On Friday, I prepared for the guests' arrival. I put on my best smile and waited on the porch. Around 3 in the afternoon, an unfamiliar car appeared on the dirt road, kicking up dust. Daniel was driving with Sarah beside him. In the back seat, David and Linda looked tense and out of place. I waved friendly as they parked. My daughter was the first to get out running to hug me. "Mom, are you okay? You look tired." "I'm great, dear," I replied, maintaining the smile. "Just getting used to country life." Daniel and his parents approached with expressions ranging from discomfort to irritation. It was clear none of them really wanted to be there. "Emily," David extended his hand formally, "we appreciate your hospitality." Linda just nodded her eyes, scanning the cabin with obvious disapproval. "Let's go inside," I suggested. "I made some coffee to welcome you." As soon as we entered, I realized the plan was starting to work. Linda immediately wrinkled her nose. "What is that smell?" "Oh, it must be the natural fertilizer I use in the garden," I explained innocently. "The soil here needs extra nutrients. You'll get used to it in a few days or weeks." Daniel examined the living room with a critical eye. "This place is smaller than it looked in the pictures you showed." "It's cozy," I replied, pouring coffee. "Perfect for one person. It will be a challenge to accommodate more people, but we'll do our best." I took them on a tour of the house, leaving the guest room for last. When I opened the door, I had to control my expression not to smile at the horrified look on Linda's face when she saw the snakeskin partially visible under the bed. "What is that?" she shrieked, backing away. "Where?" I asked, leaning down to look. "Oh, another one. Sorry, we've been having a bit of a snake problem lately. The vet said it's normal this time of year. They come in looking for warmth, but they're harmless most of the time." "Most of the time," David repeated, turning pale. "Well, except for the rattlesnakes, of course, but don't worry, it's been almost 2 weeks since the last incident." Daniel shot an alarmed look at Sarah, who seemed equally disturbed. "Mom, you didn't mention anything about snakes." "I didn't want to worry you, dear. Besides, I'm learning to live with nature. It's part of the charm of the countryside." The bathroom provoked similar reactions when I turned on the tap and the water came out with a brownish color. "It's just a little iron," I explained, "perfectly safe to drink. And the shower well, we get hot water on really sunny days." That night, while preparing dinner, I heard Daniel and Sarah talking in low voices on the porch. I approached quietly to listen. "This is unsustainable," Daniel was saying. "My parents can't stay here." "Did you see that snake?" "I'm worried too," Sarah replied. "I think we underestimated how isolated this place is. And the water—" "We have to think of another solution," Daniel concluded. I went back to the kitchen feeling a mix of relief and guilt. My plan was working, but manipulating my own daughter felt wrong. However, it was necessary. This house represented everything I had worked for. During dinner, I made sure to tell stories about the challenges of rural life, the scorpions that occasionally appeared in the corners, the difficulty of getting emergency medical help, the lack of cell phone signal. "But you know what's the hardest part?" I commented, serving a simple dessert. "The loneliness. Sometimes I go days without talking to anyone. I start talking to the walls." I laughed as if I found the situation amusing. "That's why I'm so happy to have your company." The look of panic that Linda and David exchanged was almost comical. That night, lying in my bed, I heard the agitated whispers coming from the next room. The plan was in motion, and I could already glimpse victory. But something inside me wondered, at what cost? The guests' first night went exactly as I planned. Around 2 in the morning, I remotely triggered one of the traps outside the house, causing a loud crash. Then, using a flashlight, I cast shadows that looked like animals moving on the outer walls. Linda's screams echoed through the house. "There's something out there." "Daniel, go check." I got up calmly, putting on my robe, and found them all in the hallway, pale and frightened. "It must be just a possum," I explained calmly. "They tend to wander at night. Sometimes they come onto the porch, but they're harmless unless you startle them." Daniel, holding a golf club he had brought in his luggage, looked more terrified than willing to face any creature. "A possum," he whispered. "Are you sure? Or maybe a wild boar. They're common around here, too." The next morning, coffee was served in a climate of palpable tension. Linda had deep, dark circles under her eyes, and David chewed in silence, constantly looking out the window. "Did you sleep well?" I asked innocently. "It was different," Sarah replied, trying to be diplomatic. "The noises from the woods are scary at first," I commented, pouring coffee. "But you'll get used to it. Now, about today, I have to go to town for supplies." "Will you be okay on your own? The cell signal only works at the top of the hill in case you need anything." The idea of being left isolated without communication clearly disturbed them, but they nodded stiffly. Before leaving, I made sure to lock my bedroom. Not out of distrust, I said, but out of habit from living alone. In reality, I wanted to protect my important documents and personal items. I noticed Daniel's calculating gaze following my movement. I spent the day in town not just shopping, but also talking with my lawyer, Paul, who had traveled from Chicago specially to meet me. Emily, based on what you've told me, there are signs they might be attempting some kind of property fraud, he explained as he reviewed the documents I had brought. I've seen cases like this. They start by moving in elderly relatives and then try to claim the property alleging dependency or incapacity. What can I do to protect myself? First, I'm going to register a formal document declaring your full mental and physical capacity with recent medical evaluations. Second, we will create a specific will making it clear that the property cannot be sold or transferred without your explicit consent. And third, we will install security cameras in the house for your protection, of course. When I returned to the cabin late in the afternoon, I found an almost comical scene. Linda was sitting in the car with the door locked, refusing to enter the house. David was arguing heatedly with Daniel on the porch, while Sarah seemed to be crying in the kitchen. "Did something happen?" I asked, feigning surprise. "My mother found another reptile in the bathroom," Daniel explained, barely containing his irritation, "and the water is completely yellow today." "Ah, that must be because it rained last night," I replied calmly. "It affects the well. As for the snake, it was probably just a small boa." "They like damp places." "A boa!" exclaimed David, his voice rising an octave. "They're harmless usually," I continued, unloading the groceries. "Unless you provoke them. Anyway, I brought chicken for dinner. I hope you like spicy seasoning. The peppers here are fantastic." During dinner, I kept the conversation on topics I knew would make them uncomfortable. The lack of nearby medical assistance, the frequent problems with water and electricity supply the poisonous animals common in the region. "Did you know we're the only homestead within a 20-mile radius without a health clinic?" I commented while serving more chicken. "The locals joke that if you have a heart attack, you'd better already be at peace with God." Linda barely touched her food. David ate mechanically, as if each bite were a supreme effort. "And how long are you planning to stay?" I finally asked. "So I can organize the supplies." A heavy silence fell over the table. Daniel cleared his throat. "Initially, we were thinking a few months until their situation stabilizes." "Wonderful," I exclaimed with exaggerated enthusiasm. "I always wanted company. We can do so many things together. Tomorrow, I'll teach you how to identify wild mushrooms. There are some that are delicious, as long as you don't confuse them with the poisonous ones, of course. And that night the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. As everyone retired, I made sure to leave the front door unlocked. Sometimes the neighbors show up in the middle of the night needing help," I explained. 3 miles from here lives Mr. David, who has diabetes. I've already helped him twice this month." The next morning I woke up early and made strong coffee. I was setting the table when Daniel appeared, looking as if he had slept even less than the day before. "Emily, we need to talk." "Of course, Daniel, what's up?" He sat at the table, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of clear discomfort. "I think we underestimated the peculiarities of rural life. My parents are not adapting well." "It's understandable," I replied, putting the kettle on the stove. "Life out here is for adventurous spirits. Not everyone adapts to the isolation, the snakes, the insects." "Exactly," he interrupted. "We're considering other options." I held back a smile of satisfaction. What a shame I was so happy with the company. But I understand, of course. Their health and comfort come first. Before Daniel could respond, we were interrupted by a scream coming from the guest room. Linda ran out still in her pajamas, holding a shoe. "There was a huge spider in my shoe," she exclaimed, trembling. "The size of a dinner plate." "Ah, that must be a tarantula," I commented naturally. "They tend to seek shelter in shoes. They're generally not venomous, but the bite can cause swelling and pain for a few days." Daniel's face expressed a mix of horror and determination. "That's it. We're leaving today." Sarah joined us, looking confused and distressed. "Today? But where will your parents go?" Daniel hesitated, clearly not having thought that far ahead. I seized the opportunity. "You know, I was thinking—" I began pouring coffee. "You mentioned that the house in Chicago hasn't sold yet. Why don't you use it temporarily? It would be much more convenient for everyone with hospitals nearby. Clean water. No snakes." Daniel and Sarah exchanged significant glances. "That's not a bad idea," Sarah said slowly. "We could postpone the sale for a few months." I watched in silence as the solution I had subtly planted began to sound like their own idea. In 2 hours, the suitcases were being loaded back into the car. Linda looked rejuvenated just thinking about leaving the cabin, and David didn't even bother to hide his relief. Sarah hugged me goodbye. "I'm so sorry, Mom. We thought this would be a good solution, but we see it's not viable. Are you really okay here alone?" "I'm in paradise, dear," I replied sincerely. "This simple life is all I ever wanted." As the car drove away down the dirt road, I felt a wave of relief and at the same time a pang of guilt. I had manipulated my own family with lies and tricks. But I had defended my dream, my little piece of heaven, that I earned with the sweat of 42 years of work. I went into the cabin and began to clean up the traces of my plan. I collected the snakeskins, removed the repellent, cleaned the water filter. As I worked, I noticed something that had gone unnoticed in the confusion of the last few days: a folder of documents left on the living room table. I opened it, and my heart froze. They were property transfer papers, with spaces already marked for my signature. Daniel had brought everything prepared, clearly expecting to convince or coerce me into transferring the cabin to his and Sarah's names. The discovery confirmed my darkest suspicions. It hadn't been paranoia. They were really planning to take over my house. Daniel's parents' need was just an excuse to get a foot in the door. I sat on the porch with the documents in my lap, looking at the distant mountains. The battle had been won, but the war was just beginning, and I needed to be prepared. For the next week, I once again enjoyed the silence and peace of my cabin, but with a sharp awareness that my victory might be temporary. I knew Daniel well enough to know he wouldn't give up easily. The property transfer papers I found were just the beginning. I stayed in daily contact with Paul, my lawyer, who was working to legally strengthen my position. "I've hired a private investigator," he informed me during one of our calls. "We need to understand Daniel's real financial situation and what other moves he might be making." I agreed to the measure, although I felt a pang of sadness at having reached this point. I never imagined my peaceful retirement would include investigating my own son-in-law. One Wednesday morning, I received an unexpected phone call from Sarah. "Mom, I need to talk to you in person. Can I come over tomorrow?" Something in her voice put me on alert. It wasn't anger or manipulation, but a kind of resigned exhaustion. "Of course, dear, I'll pick you up at the bus stop." "No need. I'm driving." This surprised me. "Alone?" "Yes," she simply replied, and hung up. I spent the rest of the day in a state of vigilant anxiety, preparing the house and myself for whatever was coming. I called Paul and let him know in case I needed immediate legal advice. Sarah arrived early the next afternoon. When I saw her get out of the car alone as promised, I immediately noticed how tired she looked. She had lost weight, and her eyes carried a sadness that broke my heart. "Honey," I hugged her tightly, "it's so good to see you." She returned the hug with an unusual intensity, as if she were holding herself back from breaking down. I made coffee and we sat on the porch. For a few minutes we just watched the landscape in silence. "Mom," she finally began, "I know what Daniel was planning." The frankness took me by surprise. I expected denials, more manipulations, maybe even accusations. "What do you mean?" She sighed deeply. "The papers for the house transfer. I found copies in his office along with other disturbing documents." I put my cup on the table, giving her time to continue. "Daniel didn't just lose his job. He ran up huge debts, gambling risky investments. He used our house as collateral without consulting me. We're about to lose everything." My heart ached for my daughter, but I couldn't help but feel a pang of validation too. My suspicions were not unfounded. "He saw your cabin as a lifeline," she continued. "He planned to transfer the property, sell it quickly, and use the money to cover some of the debts. All of this using his parents as an excuse. And you knew about this?" She shook her head. The tears finally escaped. "Not everything. He told me his parents needed temporary help. I only found out the truth when I found the documents yesterday." We had an intense argument. "An intense—" I held her hand across the table. "I'm sorry, dear." "No, I'm sorry," she replied firmly. "I participated in this plan even without knowing all the implications. I pressured you to give up your dream. I never should have done that." We were silent again, the weight of the revelations hanging between us. "And now?" I finally asked. "I filed for divorce," she replied with a calmness that seemed to have cost her dearly. "Daniel is desperate, and desperate people do terrible things. I found out he forged my signature on several documents. The information alarmed me immediately." "He forged your signature?" "That's a crime, Sarah." "I know," she replied, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "And that wasn't all. I consulted a lawyer yesterday. He told me Daniel opened a line of credit using our house as collateral without my consent. We're drowning in debts I didn't even know existed." I took a deep breath, trying to process everything. Not only was my cabin at risk, but my daughter was a victim of financial fraud perpetrated by her own husband. "And what do you plan to do now?" "First, make sure you're protected," she said with a determination that reminded me of myself. "I came to warn you that Daniel is furious. He knows he failed to get your cabin and blames me for not being more persuasive." A chill ran down my spine. "Do you think he might try something more direct?" "I don't know how far he would go, but—" She hesitated. "I found notes on possible ways to prove you're not competent to manage your own assets." He was researching legal guardianship. My blood ran cold. The tactic was more sinister than I had imagined. It wasn't just about emotional manipulation, but trying to have me declared legally incompetent to take control of my assets. "He mentioned having a contact at the Adult Protective Services," Sarah continued. "He talked about requesting a forced psychiatric evaluation claiming you're living in unsanitary conditions and exhibiting erratic behavior." "Based on what?" I asked indignantly. "On the snakes, the water problems, your choice to live in isolation. He would distort everything he saw here to create a narrative that you're not fit to take care of yourself." I grabbed my phone. "I need to call Paul immediately. This is a serious threat." As I dialed, Sarah placed her hand on mine. "Mom, I didn't just come to warn you, I came to help you protect yourself." The conversation with Paul was brief and to the point. I explained the situation, and he immediately suggested a series of defensive measures. "I'm going to get a full medical evaluation for you as soon as possible to document your full physical and mental capacity. I also suggest installing security cameras on the property and documenting any communication with Daniel or his representatives. And Emily, don't leave the cabin unoccupied for now. If you need to leave, ask someone you trust to stay there." After hanging up, I explained the plan to Sarah. To my surprise, she nodded with determination. "I'll stay with you for a few days, and I know exactly when Daniel plans to act. He has a meeting scheduled with that contact at the agency for next Tuesday." "How do you know?" A sad smile crossed her face. "He has no idea I found everything out. He still thinks I'm on his side." "Just upset. He left his calendar open on the computer. The meeting is marked as Emily Case Consultation." I spent the next few days in a state of constant alert, alternating between preparing legal defenses with Paul and trying to provide some emotional comfort to my daughter. Sarah oscillated between moments of fierce determination and periods of deep sadness, processing the betrayal she had suffered. On Sunday, as we prepared lunch together, she finally talked about the in-laws. "They knew Mom. Maybe not all the details, but they knew Daniel wanted your house. The story of their foreclosure was partially true. They really lost their house to debt, but not that recently. They've been living with Linda's sister for over a year. So why the charade? Daniel convinced them it would be a solution for everyone. They would have a place to live. He would solve his financial problems by selling the cabin and you. Well, in his version, you didn't really need this place and would be better off moving back to the city." The coldness of the calculation shocked me. And they agreed so easily. When it comes to money, Daniel's family has always been pragmatic. She chose the word carefully. "I think they came to establish residency. They would stay long enough for you to feel uncomfortable and give up, and then Daniel would sell the property, giving them a small share." "And you, Sarah, where did you fit into that plan?" She looked down. He convinced me you were being stubborn by isolating yourself here, that it was dangerous for a woman your age to live so far from everything. He said the cabin could be our country house, and that you would stay with us in Chicago where you belonged. My heart ached for the manipulation my daughter had suffered. Daniel knew her weak spots, the concern for my safety, the desire to have me close, and had exploited them for his own ends. On Tuesday morning, we had a visit from Paul, accompanied by a geriatric doctor and a psychologist, both with impeccable credentials. I underwent a full evaluation documenting my physical and mental health. The reports were clear. I was in excellent condition for my age, fully capable of making my own decisions and taking care of myself. I also recommend we make a video, Paul suggested after the exams were concluded. A statement from you explaining your situation, your conscious choices, and the reasons why you chose to live here. We recorded the testimony on the porch with the mountains as a backdrop. I spoke clearly about my career as a nurse, my retirement dream, the careful financial planning I had done, and how life in the cabin represented everything I had ever wanted. This is not an impulsive decision or a whim, I stated for the camera. It is the result of 4 decades of hard work and meticulous planning. I am fully aware of the challenges of living in a rural area, and I have taken all necessary precautions to ensure my safety and well-being. As I spoke, I noticed Sarah watching with a complex expression, pride mixed with a deep sadness. I realized she was seeing, perhaps for the first time, the full extent of my autonomy and determination. Early in the afternoon, Paul left with all the necessary documentation to build our defense. Moments after his departure, the phone rang. It was Daniel. "Emily, we need to talk." His voice sounded controlled, but with an underlying threat. "I'm worried about you living alone in that corner of the world." "I'm not alone, Daniel. Sarah is with me." A momentary silence. "Sarah is with you. Since when?" "For a few days now. We're having a wonderful time together." I heard his breathing become ragged, the anger barely contained. "Put her on, please." I handed the phone to my daughter, who put it on speaker. "Sarah, what are you doing there? We need to talk about the divorce and—" "There's nothing to talk about, Daniel." She interrupted him with a firmness that filled me with pride. "I've already made my decision, and I found out about your plans for my mother." "What plans? What are you talking about?" "The property transfer papers, the consultation scheduled for today with your friend at the Protective Services Agency, the attempt to declare my mother incompetent." Another silence, longer this time. "You don't understand," he finally said, his voice now clearly agitated. "We're on the verge of ruin." "I need solutions." "Your debts are not my mother's problem," Sarah replied firmly, "nor mine. We will resolve this legally through the divorce." "You can't do this to me." "I already did." "And one more thing, Daniel. If you try anything against my mother, anything at all, I have enough evidence to incriminate you for forgery and fraud. Think carefully before you act." She hung up the phone and sank into a chair, trembling slightly. "I'm proud of you," I said, taking her hand. "I learned from the best," she replied with a small smile. "I just hope this is enough to stop him." Unfortunately, it wasn't. The next morning, as we were having coffee on the porch, an official car pulled up at the entrance to the property. A middle-aged woman with a serious expression and a folder in her hand approached. "Emily?" she asked formally. "That's me." "I'm Vanessa, a social worker from the County Adult Protective Services. We received a report about your situation, and I've come to conduct an assessment." Sarah and I exchanged glances. Daniel had gone ahead with his plan even after our warnings. "Of course, Ms. Vanessa," I replied calmly. "Please come in." "We were just having coffee. Would you like a cup?" The woman seemed momentarily taken aback by my receptiveness. "No, thank you. This will just be a formal visit." We led Vanessa into the cabin, which was impeccably tidy. I noticed her professional eyes assessing every detail. The cleanliness, the organization, the medications carefully arranged in the kitchen cabinet, the abundance of fresh food. "We received a report alleging that you live in unsanitary conditions and possibly exhibit mental confusion," she explained, consulting her notes. "Interesting," I replied, maintaining my calm. "And who made that report?" "I can't disclose that, but it was a concerned family member. Sarah stepped forward. It was my husband Daniel, wasn't it? We're in the process of divorcing, and he's trying to control my mother's assets. The social worker didn't confirm, but her expression revealed that Sarah had hit the mark. Ms. Vanessa, I continued, anticipating this type of situation, I prepared some documents that I'd like you to examine. I handed her the complete medical report, the psychological evaluation, and a copy of the video recording, all organized in a folder. As you can see, I underwent comprehensive medical and psychological evaluations less than 24 hours ago. The professionals attested to my full capacity. I also have the contact information for my lawyer who is aware of this situation. Vanessa examined the documents with growing surprise. This is very thorough, she observed. We rarely see reports answered with such meticulous documentation. It's no coincidence, Sarah explained. We knew my husband would try something like this. He forged my signature on financial documents and is trying to take control of my mother's property by claiming she's incompetent. The social worker frowned clearly, not expecting this level of preparation and counterclaim. I see. Well, I still have to complete my assessment, but these documents will certainly be considered. I spent the next hour answering Vanessa's questions, demonstrating my lucidity and autonomy. I showed her the cabin, explaining the security systems I had installed, the stock of food and medicine, my plan for medical emergencies. When we returned to the porch, she seemed satisfied. Emily, based on what I saw today and the documentation presented, I find no evidence to corroborate the allegations in the report. You seem perfectly capable of taking care of yourself and managing your assets. Thank you for your fair assessment, I replied. Before leaving, Vanessa hesitated, as if considering whether to say something more. If I may make a personal comment, Emily, it's rare to see a person your age so well prepared and organized. You clearly planned every aspect of this move with exceptional care. 42 years of planning, Ms. Vanessa, I replied with a smile. When you wait that long for a dream, you leave nothing to chance. After her departure, Sarah and I hugged, finally allowing ourselves to feel the relief of having overcome another hurdle. But we both knew the war was far from over. He won't give up easily, Sarah said, as we watched the social worker's car drive away, especially now knowing I'm against him. Then we will continue to protect ourselves, I replied with the determination that had sustained me throughout my life. Together. That evening, as we prepared dinner, I received a message from Paul. I've filed all the documents. Your property is legally shielded. No one can challenge it without facing a full legal process. I showed the message to Sarah, who smiled with relief. One less problem. But I knew from the determined glint in her eyes that she was already thinking about the next step, not just defending, but counterattacking. In the following week, Paul presented me with a complete legal strategy. In addition to protecting my property, I was prepared to take action against Daniel for attempted fraud and coercion. We have enough evidence of his intentions, he explained during a video call. The property transfer papers, the false report to Adult Protective Services, Sarah's forged signatures. We can press criminal charges if we want. I looked at my daughter, who was listening intently beside me. The decision would primarily affect her. What do you think, Sarah? She took a deep breath. Part of me wants to see him face all the legal consequences, but another part, we have the girls to think about. A criminal case against their father would be traumatic. Paul nodded understandingly. There's a third option. We can use the threat of legal action as leverage for a divorce settlement. He gives up any claim to your house, assumes full responsibility for the debts he incurred, and we don't proceed with the criminal charges. And my cabin, I asked. How do we guarantee he won't try again? I've already taken care of that, Paul replied. I established an irrevocable trust. The property is legally protected and can only be transferred under the conditions you specified to Sarah after your passing or to your granddaughters in case Sarah is no longer alive. Not even you can alter those conditions now. The news brought me immense relief. My little paradise was finally safe. There's one more thing, Paul continued. We investigated Daniel's debts. He owes dangerous people, Emily. Some of the money came from loan sharks. It's another reason to be careful with the next steps. This revelation brought a new dimension of concern. Daniel was not only desperate for money, but was potentially dealing with criminals. "What does this mean for our safety?" Sarah asked, visibly alarmed. "It means we have to be extremely cautious," Paul replied. "I suggest you two don't stay alone for now. I've hired a private security guard who can stay on the property while we resolve this situation." Initially, I resisted the idea of having a stranger in my refuge, but Sarah's safety was the priority. I accepted Paul's recommendation. Michael, the security guard, arrived the next day. A middle-aged man, discreet and professional, a former military police officer with experience in personal protection. He settled into a small room attached to the garage, almost unnoticeable, except for his reassuring presence. "I won't interfere with your routine, Emily," he assured me. "I'm just here as a precaution." His presence turned out to be providential just 3 days later. It was almost midnight when the property's silent alarm was triggered. Michael woke us up discreetly. "We have movement on the south perimeter," he reported in a low voice. "2 individuals. They seem to be scouting the house." My heart raced. "Daniel, I can't identify them." "Stay in the room. Lock the door. I've already notified the local police." Michael disappeared, silently moving like a shadow to check the situation. Sarah and I stayed in my room, the door locked, listening intently. After what felt like an eternity, we heard raised voices followed by the sound of a car speeding away. Minutes later, Michael returned. "It was 2 men," he explained. "It wasn't Daniel. From their behavior and the gear they were carrying, they were professionals, probably collectors for his debts." "Oh my God," Sarah whispered. "They came for him here." "More likely they came to assess the property," Michael replied. "People like that usually investigate all potential assets before making a direct approach." The police arrived half an hour later, recorded the incident, and swept the area. They found no one, but they reinforced security on the nearby roads for the rest of the night. I couldn't sleep. Sitting in the kitchen with Sarah, both of us drinking tea to calm our nerves, I reflected on how my peaceful refuge had turned into a war zone. "This has gone too far," I finally said. "Daniel put not only my possessions at risk, but our physical safety." Sarah nodded, her face pale in the dim light. "We need to end this for good, Mom. We can't live in fear." The next morning, Paul was informed of the incident and immediately intensified his efforts. "I'm contacting Daniel today," he declared. "He needs to understand the gravity of the situation." While we waited for news, Sarah and I tried to maintain some semblance of normality, continuing our daily routines under Michael's discreet watch. The tension was palpable, but I refused to be driven from my own home by fear. On the 3rd day after the incident, Paul brought surprising news. "Daniel has agreed to all the conditions," he announced during our daily video call. "No objections, no additional claims. He will assume all the debts, waive any rights to the house in Chicago, and has committed to never again interfere in matters related to Emily's property." "Why the sudden change?" Sarah asked suspiciously. "Apparently he had an encounter with his creditors," Paul explained. "I don't have details, but from what I understood, it was persuasive enough to make him seek an immediate solution." I exchanged glances with Sarah. We both knew what persuasive likely meant when it came to loan sharks. "Is he physically okay?" I asked, surprising myself with the concern. "Yes, as far as I know. Scared but unharmed, and much more cooperative." The settlement papers were signed 2 days later. Daniel appeared at Paul's office in Chicago, while Sarah and I signed our part in the nearest town. There was no direct contact, which was a relief. With the agreement finalized, I felt a huge weight lift from my shoulders. My cabin was safe. Sarah was legally protected. The debts would be Daniel's sole responsibility. After a few weeks without incidents, Michael deemed it safe to end his watch, although he installed a reinforced security system before leaving. "The property is well protected now, Emily," he assured. "Cameras, motion sensors, a direct link to the local police. You'll be safe." I thanked him sincerely for his protection, feeling that I had gained not just a security guard, but a friend. With the legal situation resolved and security established, Sarah and I finally had time to reflect on the future. She had taken a leave of absence from the school where she taught in Chicago, but the period was coming to an end. "What do you plan to do now, dear?" I asked one evening as we shared a bottle of wine on the porch. She contemplated the stars for a moment before answering. I don't want to go back to Chicago. There are too many painful memories there. And the girls, they need stability. I've been thinking about looking for a position at the local school. The idea of having my daughter and granddaughters nearby filled me with joy, but I tried to contain my enthusiasm. Are you sure it's a huge change? And what about the girls? How do they feel? They love coming here. They've always asked to spend more time at Grandma's farm. She smiled. And honestly, Mom, after all this, I realize how valuable it is to have you close. Not as a dependency, but as a partnership. That night we planned the transition. Sarah would sell the house in Chicago as soon as the divorce was final. With the money, she would buy a small house in the town nearest to my cabin. The girls would attend the local school, and she would look for a teaching position. It won't be the same life we had, she acknowledged, but maybe it will be better. 2 weeks later, my granddaughters Leah and Bree, aged 12 and 9, came to visit. Daniel had agreed to let them spend the weekend with us, a small test for the new reality we were building. Watching them run through the property, exploring the woods, feeding the birds that visited my feeders, brought a joy I hadn't felt in months. Their laughter echoed through the valley, healing something deep inside me. On Saturday night, sitting around the bonfire I had prepared in the backyard, Bree rested her head on my shoulder. "Grandma, when we come to live near here, will you teach us how to make bread like today's?" "Of course, dear," I replied, feeling tears welling up. "And many other things." "Bree, Mom said it's not for sure that we're moving yet," corrected Leah, always the more cautious of the two. "But I want to," Bree exclaimed. "In the city, we can't have a dog in the apartment. Here we can have dogs, chickens, even a pony." Sarah laughed, exchanging glances with me. "Let's take it slow, young lady. First the house, then we'll discuss the zoo." At that moment, looking at my family gathered around the fire under the starry sky that only the countryside can offer, I felt a deep certainty. All the suffering, all the struggle had been worth it. My dream of a quiet retirement had been threatened, but I emerged from the battle with something even more precious. Not just the cabin, but the promise of a shared life with my daughter and granddaughters. A legacy of strength, determination, and love that would survive long after I was gone. The next day, as I waved goodbye to the car taking my granddaughters back to the city, I made a silent promise to myself. This property won with so much sacrifice and defended with such determination would become the safe home my family deserved. And no one would ever take it from us again. The seasons changed, bringing new rhythms to our life. Fall arrived with its golden afternoons and cool nights perfect for sitting on the porch with a blanket over my knees, watching the leaves dance in the wind. Sarah's divorce was finalized in October, faster than expected thanks to Daniel's unusual cooperation. The house in Chicago was put up for sale immediately, with 3 interested buyers in the first week. Apparently, Daniel had moved to the south of the country, looking to start fresh away from the debts and the past. "He called to talk to the girls," Sarah told me one night. "He sounded different, more humble maybe. Said he's working for his cousin's company in Miami." "Do you think he's really changed?" She considered the question for a moment. "I don't know. Maybe the scare was strong enough to shake him up, or maybe it's just a new strategy. Either way, I'm keeping my distance, but I'm allowing contact with the girls. They deserve to have a father, even an imperfect one." In November, we found the perfect house for Sarah and the girls. A cozy 3-bedroom home in the small town of Blue Ridge, just a 20-minute drive from my cabin. The yard was spacious, with room for the vegetable garden Leah so wanted, and for the dog Bree wouldn't stop mentioning. The local school had an opening for a science teacher, Sarah's field, which would start in the new school year in February. Everything seemed to be fitting together like pieces of a puzzle, finally finding its shape. The move happened in December, with the help of Paul and his wife Anna, who came from Chicago especially for the occasion. In 2 days, the house was set up and cozy, ready for its first Christmas. "It's smaller than what we were used to," Sarah commented as we hung lights on the small Christmas tree. "But I feel like I can breathe here." I understood exactly what she meant. Sometimes the smallest spaces offer more freedom than the mansions that imprison us with their demands and upkeep. Christmas was simple and perfect. We prepared dinner together with the girls helping to decorate cookies. We sang carols around the table, and for the first time in many years, I felt completely at peace. "Grandma, can we go see the stars on your porch later?" Bree asked as we washed the dishes. "Of course, dear. The sky will be especially beautiful tonight." Later, as the four of us snuggled under blankets on my porch, watching a sky sprinkled with thousands of stars, Leah made a surprising observation. "I think everything happened the way it was supposed to." "How so, honey?" Sarah asked. "If Dad hadn't tried to take Grandma's house, we wouldn't be here now all together, and I like it here much better than Chicago." The wisdom of that 12-year-old girl moved me deeply. Indeed, the adversities had paved the way for a new life that we might never have imagined or chosen on our own. January brought heavy rains that transformed the landscape into vibrant shades of green. I spent hours helping Sarah and the girls plant their first vegetable garden: tomatoes, lettuce, carrots, herbs. I taught them what I had learned from my own experience, feeling the joy of passing on knowledge that could sustain generations. At the end of the month, the new family member arrived: Thor, a golden-haired mix that Bree chose from the local shelter. The dog, medium-sized and full of endless energy, quickly adapted to the new family, following Bree everywhere, like a golden shadow, and sleeping at the foot of her bed every night. February came with the start of classes. Sarah began her new job as a science teacher, nervous but excited about the challenge. The girls started at the local school, initially apprehensive, but soon made friends that helped with the transition. Life was beginning to find a calm and comforting rhythm. It was during this period that I began to think more about the future of the property. Although Paul had legally guaranteed that the cabin would pass to Sarah after my death, I felt the need to do more than just preserve it. "I've been thinking," I told Sarah during one of our Sunday lunches, "about expanding the property a little." "Expand how?" "The neighboring land is for sale. It's 7 more acres with a spring and an old persimmon orchard." "It would be a good addition." Sarah looked at me surprised. "You want to buy more land? I thought the cabin was your final dream." "It was, or so I thought." I looked out the window, watching Leah and Bree playing with Thor in the backyard. But now I realize that dreams can grow. I imagine this place not just as my refuge, but as a legacy for the 3 of you, a place where the girls can grow up connected to nature, where they can bring their own children one day. "I don't know if we're in a financial position to expand right now," Sarah replied cautiously. "We're still getting settled." "I am," I replied simply. "I saved for longer than I needed for the cabin. I have a substantial reserve." The following week, we visited the land together. It was a beautiful property, slightly sloped with a small valley where a crystal-clear stream ran. The orchard, though in need of care, had huge trees that promised abundant fruit. "We could build a second house here," I suggested, pointing to a flat area with a view of the valley. "Not now, but eventually. A larger house for you when the girls are older. We could connect the properties with a path." I saw Sarah's eyes light up as she imagined the possibilities. The dream was beginning to grow inside her, too. We bought the land at the end of February, an investment in the future that represented much more than acres of land. It was a commitment to the life we were building, a declaration that we had chosen this path not just as a temporary refuge, but as our new reality. In March, I received an unexpected letter. The envelope had the letterhead of a Miami law firm, and for a moment my heart raced with the worry that Daniel was trying some new legal tactic. But the content surprised me completely. It was a personal letter from Daniel, not a legal document handwritten on plain paper, not the firm's letterhead. "Emily, I know you must be surprised to receive this letter, maybe even worried. I want to assure you that there is no threat or strategy here, only feelings that need to be expressed. I have no justifications for my behavior. What I did was unforgivable. I tried to take something that meant everything to you, something you earned with decades of honest work, while I was looking for an easy solution to problems I created with my own hands. The last few months have forced me to face painful truths about myself. The person I had become was not someone I could be proud of. I was not the father my daughters deserved, or the man I once promised to be. I'm in therapy now. I work a modest but honest job at my cousin's company. I'm paying off my debts gradually, living simply. I don't expect forgiveness. Not from you, not from Sarah. I just wanted you to know that I finally understood the value of what I tried to steal. Not just a property, but a dream, a life achievement, a symbol of dignity and independence. I hope you find in your cabin all the peace and happiness you deserve. And I thank you, as strange as it sounds, for having fought with such determination. Your strength showed me the kind of character I hope to one day develop. Respectfully, Daniel. I reread the letter several times, searching for manipulation or falsehood between the lines. But time had taught me to recognize sincerity, and something in those words sounded true. I showed the letter to Sarah that night. She read it in silence, emotions passing over her face like clouds on a windy day. "Do you believe him?" I finally asked. "I don't know," she replied honestly. "Maybe. The girls say he sounds different on the weekly calls. More present, more interested in their real lives, not just asking superficial questions." "People can change," I commented, "especially when they face the consequences of their actions." "Maybe," Sarah nodded. "But trust once broken is hard to rebuild." "Not impossible, though," I replied gently. "Just extremely difficult. And it's earned slowly with consistent actions over time." Life went on with the small joys and challenges of daily life, gradually replacing the big dramas of the previous months. We planted fruit trees on the new land. We established the path that connected the two properties, and I began teaching the girls the names of native plants and their properties. One afternoon in May, as we were harvesting persimmons in the newly acquired orchard, Bree made an observation that deeply touched my heart. "Grandma, did you know that the oldest trees bear the best fruit?" She asked, her face and hands purple from the fruit's juice. "That's true." I confirmed, "These trees are at least 60 years old, maybe more." "Just like you," she exclaimed innocently. "You got better with age, too." "How so, dear?" "Mom said you were always great, but before you were quieter, always doing what others wanted. Now you're strong and determined like a big tree that no one can knock down." I looked at Sarah, who smiled embarrassedly. "Kids and their honest mouths," she commented. "But it's true," Bree continued. "The girl at school was bothering me, and I remembered what Grandma did when the bad people tried to take her cabin. I stood my ground and didn't let the girl make me cry." I hugged my granddaughter, feeling an emotion that went beyond words. Without realizing it, I had passed on more than practical knowledge about plants and animals. I had shown them the value of determination, of courage, of fighting for what we love. That night, sitting alone on my porch, I reflected on the journey of the past few months. What began as a threat to my retirement dream had transformed into something much greater, the creation of a new kind of life for my entire family. The cabin I had defended with such determination was no longer just my personal refuge, but the heart of a small family universe we were building together. My granddaughters would grow up knowing the taste of fruit picked directly from the tree, the sound of silence in the rural dawns, the incomparable brightness of the stars far from light pollution. In June, I received an unexpected call from Paul. "Emily, I have some interesting news," he announced. "Remember that evaluation the social worker did at your cabin? Apparently your case sparked discussions at the Adult Protective Services Agency." "What kind of discussions?" "Positive ones," he assured me. "They were impressed with your preparation, your autonomy, your ability to defend yourself against attempts at financial exploitation. They want to invite you to participate in a panel on senior rights and prevention of property abuse." The idea took me by surprise. "A panel, me? I've never been one for public speaking, Paul." "It would just be an informal conversation sharing your experience. Many seniors face similar situations and don't know how to protect themselves. Your story could help them." After a few days of reflection, I accepted the invitation. The event would be held in August in the nearest large city for an audience of about 50 people seniors from the region, social workers, lawyers, specializing in elder law. Sarah offered to accompany me. "I can help you organize your thoughts, Mom. You have a lot to share." In the following weeks, we worked together preparing my presentation. It wouldn't be a formal speech, but I wanted to be clear on the main points I wanted to address. The most important thing, I explained to Sarah as we organized the notes, is that other seniors understand that planning is not just about money, but about autonomy, about the right to choose how and where we want to live our final years. On the day of the event, I arrived nervous but determined. The room was full not just with the 50 expected participants, but with almost 80 people of all ages. Apparently, the topic had generated more interest than anticipated. When it was my turn to speak, I looked at the audience and saw faces that reflected my own experiences. Older men and women, many accompanied by adult children, some alone, all seeking guidance to navigate the complex territories of old age independence and family relationships. "My name is Emily," I began, "and at 65 I discovered a strength I didn't know I possessed." I told my story without unnecessary drama, focusing on the practical aspects, the importance of legal documentation, the need to know your rights, the value of allies like Paul, the courage to set clear boundaries with family. Many of us were raised to always give in, always accommodate, always prioritize the wishes of others over our own, I explained, especially women of my generation. We're told it's selfish to think of ourselves, that we must sacrifice our dreams for the dreams of our children and grandchildren. I noticed several nods of recognition in the audience, but there came a moment when I realized a fundamental truth. Taking care of myself is not selfishness, it's a necessity. As a nurse, I always taught my patients that you can't pour from an empty cup. We need to strengthen ourselves first, to then help others. I spoke about the importance of creating support systems that don't rely exclusively on family, about how to document situations of pressure or abuse, about how to establish legal protections for hard-earned assets. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. In the following minutes, I was approached by various participants, many seniors with stories similar to mine. Some professionals impressed with the strategies I had developed, even young people who wanted guidance on how to help their parents or grandparents preserve their autonomy. One lady in particular moved me. Linda, 72, a widow who had been pressured by her son to sell her house and move into a room in the back of his residence. "Listening to you today gave me courage," she said, holding my hands. "I'm going to see a lawyer tomorrow. I don't want to sell my house. It's where I lived with my husband for 40 years, where I have my memories, my neighbors, my independence." On the way home, Sarah drove in silence until she finally commented, "I'm so proud of you, Mom. You know that, right?" "Thank you, dear." "But why exactly?" "For everything. For fighting for what you believed in. For showing me that it's never too late to set boundaries. For now, helping other seniors do the same." She paused before adding, "And for giving me a second chance even when I let you down." "You never let me down," I replied firmly. "You were manipulated just as I have been many times in my life. The difference is that you had the courage to recognize it and change direction. Many people never manage that." We arrived home at sunset, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. The girls came running to greet us, eager to know how the event had gone. I told them about the people I met, the stories I heard, the impact my experience had made. "Does that mean you're famous now, Grandma?" Bree asked with wide eyes. I laughed heartily. "Not at all. It just means that sometimes when we share our difficulties, we discover we're not alone. And that can make all the difference." That night, after everyone had gone to their homes, I was once again alone on my porch, watching the stars. The silence I had so longed for enveloped me like a blanket, no longer as a solitary refuge, but as a sacred space where I could reflect on the unexpected blessings that had emerged from such turbulent times. I realized that in defending my cabin, I had actually discovered a more complete and authentic version of myself. An Emily who was not afraid to set boundaries, who knew her own worth, who could inspire others with her experience. And maybe that was the real gift retirement brought me. Not just a physical place to call my own, but an inner space of autonomy and wisdom that no one could ever take from me. The first anniversary of my move to the cabin came on a perfect spring Sunday. The sky was an intense blue, dotted with white clouds that looked like cotton. The trees had dressed themselves in new leaves, and wildflowers colored the fields around the property. Sarah and the girls prepared a surprise. A special lunch in the area we had transformed into a small garden on the newly acquired land. They set up a rustic table under the shade of the persimmon trees, decorated with flowers picked from the property and embroidered tablecloths they found at a local bazaar. To commemorate a year of resilience and rebirth, Sarah toasted raising a glass of homemade wine we had learned to make from a neighbor. The girls also prepared gifts. Leah handed me a handmade book where she had recorded in her neat handwriting all the medicinal plants we had identified on the property, complete with detailed drawings and notes on their uses. Bree had built, with the help of the school's art teacher, a carved wooden sign for the entrance of the property. Emily's refuge won with grit, protected with love. So no one ever forgets that this land is rightfully yours, Grandma, she explained seriously. That day marked not only the anniversary of my move, but also the beginning of a new family tradition. We decided that every March we would celebrate Resilience Day, as Bree affectionately named it. A time to remember that some dreams are worth the fight, and that true family is strengthened, not weakened, by adversity. Over the months, our small community grew in unexpected ways. Paul and his wife Anna, charmed by the region during their visits, bought a small farm a few miles away to spend weekends and eventually retire there as well. Michael, the security guard who protected us in the most tense moments, opened a rural security consulting company in the nearby town and frequently visited us, bringing new technologies and tips to keep the property safe without sacrificing its natural beauty. And then there was Vanessa, the social worker, who had investigated the complaint against me. After the panel on senior rights, she sought me out for a frank conversation. "Your case changed my professional approach," she confessed. "I realized that we often see seniors as vulnerable people who need to be protected, forgetting that they also have the right to self-determination and independence." She began to visit me occasionally initially for professional reasons. She wanted to learn more about how I had structured my rural life to maintain autonomy, even with advancing age. Over time, our conversations evolved into a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and a shared interest in protecting the rights of seniors. On one of these visits, she brought an unexpected proposal. "Emily, we are developing a pilot program at the Senior Council focused on preventing financial abuse and promoting autonomy. I would like you to consider being a volunteer mentor, sharing your experience with other seniors in vulnerable situations." The idea took me by surprise. A mentor me. I have no training for that, Vanessa. You have something more valuable: lived experience, practical knowledge, and an incredible ability to face challenges without losing dignity or compassion. I accepted the invitation after some thought. Once a month, I would spend an afternoon at the city's community center advising seniors who were facing family pressures, manipulation attempts, or simply seeking guidance on how to maintain their independence as they aged. This new role brought me a deep and unexpected satisfaction. After decades of caring for people's bodies as a nurse, I was now caring for their rights, their autonomy, their dignity. Every story I heard resonated in some way with my own journey. Every small victory I witnessed: a senior who managed to keep her house against her children's pressure, a gentleman who learned to manage his own finances after years of dependence, reminded me that my own struggle had been worthwhile, not just for me, but for all who were inspired by it. In September, I received an unexpected email from a regional publisher. Someone who had attended the panel on senior rights suggested that my story could become a small book, part of a collection on active and conscious aging. "I'm not a writer," I replied initially. "You don't need to be," the editor assured. "We can assign someone to record your memories and knowledge. You would just share your story and we would handle the rest." Sarah strongly encouraged me. "Mom, think of how many people you could help. There are so many seniors facing similar pressures, not knowing how to protect themselves." The book project moved forward slowly with weekly interviews, where I shared not only the story of the cabin, but my entire journey. The decades as a single nurse saving every penny, the meticulous planning for retirement, the challenges of setting boundaries with family, the practical strategies for maintaining independence in old age. "I don't want it to be just about me," I insisted. "I want it to be a practical guide, something other people can use as a reference when they face similar situations." In November, something I never imagined possible happened. Sarah approached me with an expression torn between worried and hopeful. "Daniel called. He wants to visit the girls here if you'll allow it." My first instinct was to refuse immediately. The memory of his attempts to take my property was still vivid. But seeing Sarah's expression, the complexity of her emotions, the evident desire for her daughters to maintain some relationship with their father, I realized I needed to consider more than just my own feelings. "Are you comfortable with that?" I asked. "I still don't trust him completely," she replied honestly. "But the girls miss him, and he has been making an effort in recent months. He calls regularly, sends small but meaningful gifts, shows genuine interest in their lives. I think he deserves a chance to show he has really changed." After much reflection, I agreed to the visit, but with clear conditions. Daniel would stay in town, not in our houses. The meetings with the girls would take place in public places or at Sarah's house, never on my property. And there would always be a trusted adult nearby, not to overtly supervise, but to ensure everyone's emotional safety. When the day came, I confess I was tense. I watched from Sarah's kitchen window as the rental car parked at the entrance. Daniel got out carrying 2 small wrapped packages. He was thinner, with slightly graying hair at the temples. His face had an expression I didn't immediately recognize, but which I later identified as humility, something I had never associated with him. The girls ran to hug him, and for a moment I saw something genuine in his response. The real emotion of a father reconnecting with his daughters after months of separation. I stepped away from the window, giving them privacy for that moment. Later, when Sarah invited me to join them for afternoon tea, I found Daniel in the living room. Our eyes met briefly before he looked down. "Emily," he greeted me formally. "Thank you for allowing this visit. It means a lot to me to be able to see the girls." "They missed you too," I replied neutrally. An uncomfortable silence followed, broken only when Bree ran in to show me the gift she had received, a small but good quality telescope. "Dad said that here in the country, away from the city lights, I'll be able to see many more stars than in Chicago," she explained excitedly. I looked at Daniel, surprised by the appropriate choice of gift, something that recognized and valued the girls' new lifestyle instead of reinforcing what they had left behind. "It was an excellent choice," I commented, allowing myself a small smile. "We have fantastic skies here." The visit lasted 3 days. Daniel remained respectful and distant towards me, focusing his attention on his daughters. On the last night after the girls went to bed, he asked to speak with me and Sarah. "I know words don't mean much after everything that happened," he began, visibly nervous, "but I want you to know that I am genuinely sorry. Not just for what I tried to do, but for who I became." He talked about his therapy process, about the work with his cousin that was teaching him humility, about the financial management program he was following to pay off his debts. "I don't expect immediate forgiveness or trust. I know I need to earn it back with time and consistency. I just want the opportunity to be a present father to my daughters and maybe eventually someone you don't completely despise." Sarah and I exchanged glances. There was sincerity in his words, but we also knew that the real test would come with time. "The girls need their father," Sarah finally replied, "and you have made an effort in recent months. We will continue to allow visits as long as you maintain that responsible behavior." "That's all I ask," he replied with evident relief. "An opportunity to prove I can be better." When Daniel left the next morning, I watched from the window as he said goodbye to his daughters with long hugs. There was a fragility in him I had never noticed before, an awareness that everything he held most precious could be lost by his own actions. In the months that followed, he kept his word, visiting regularly and remaining respectful of the boundaries we set. He wasn't perfect, but he was visibly trying. The girls flourished with their father's presence in their lives, even if now in a different capacity. In March of the second year, we celebrated Resilience Day again, our commemoration of the anniversary of my move to the cabin. This time the event was larger. Paul and Anna came from Chicago. Michael brought his new girlfriend Vanessa, participated enthusiastically, and even Daniel was invited, though with some initial hesitation on my part. As everyone gathered around the table in the orchard, I looked at this improbable group. People that fate had brought together through circumstances that initially seemed only painful, but ended up creating significant connections. Sarah raised her glass for a toast. To my mother, Emily, who taught us that some dreams are so important that they are worth fighting for with all our strength. Who showed us that setting boundaries is not selfishness, but self-love. And who demonstrated that it's never too late to discover one's own strength. As everyone raised their glasses, I felt a deep emotion wash over me. The journey had been difficult, full of unpleasant surprises and challenges I never imagined facing at 65. But looking at my expanded family, not just by blood ties, but by connections of respect and mutual support, I realized that I had received much more than just the cabin I had so dreamed of. I had received a new beginning, a second chance to live authentically, setting healthy boundaries and cultivating relationships based on true respect, not empty obligations or emotional manipulations. My book, The Age of Resistance: How to Protect Your Dreams and Dignity in Your Senior Years, was published in the fall of that year. It didn't become a national bestseller, but it found its audience. Seniors looking for inspiration to defend their autonomy, professionals working with older adults, family members seeking to better understand the needs and rights of their elderly loved ones. The talks and counseling sessions at the community center continued, now supplemented by a small support group for seniors facing family pressures. We called the group Voices of Experience, a name that recognized not only the vulnerability that comes with age, but also the wisdom and courage we accumulate over decades of life. One afternoon, as I was returning from one of these sessions, I found Bree sitting on my cabin porch waiting for me. At 10 years old now, she had become an observant and sensitive child, often seeking my company for conversations that surprised with their depth. "Grandma," she began as soon as I sat next to her, "at school the teacher asked us to write about our hero. Can I write about you?" The question took me by surprise, causing a lump in my throat. "Me? Dear, I'm nobody's hero, just a stubborn old woman who didn't want to give up her corner." She shook her head with conviction. "That's not true. You showed that even when people try to make you believe you don't deserve something, you can fight for what's yours. That's being a hero." I hugged her, unable to answer with words. How could I explain to a child that the real heroism was in people like her mother, who had the courage to recognize manipulation and start from scratch? Or in so many seniors I met at the community center, facing challenges much greater than mine with dignity and perseverance. "If you want to write about me, I'll be honored," I finally replied. But remember that the real heroine of our story is your mother, who had the courage to start over and build something new for you. Bree smiled, satisfied with my answer. "I can write about both of you. The teacher said we can have more than one hero." The seasons continued their relentless cycle. Winter arrived with cold mornings and mists that enveloped the cabin like a protective cloak. On the coldest nights, we sat around the fireplace, sometimes just me and my thoughts, other times with Sarah and the girls, sharing stories and planning the future. One of those plans began to take concrete shape with the arrival of spring. The idea arose during one of the Voices of Experience group meetings when several participants expressed the desire to live in a place like my cabin, but feared the isolation and practical challenges. "What if we created a community?" suggested Linda, the lady who had sought me out after the panel on senior rights. Not a nursing home or retirement home, but a place where independent seniors could have their own homes but close enough for mutual support. The idea resonated strongly with me. Talking with Vanessa, Paul, and Sarah, we began to develop a concept for a senior village small homes adapted for accessibility, with common areas for socialization, community gardens, and a mutual support system that would allow residents to maintain their independence without the isolation many feared. "We could use part of the new land," Sarah suggested. "The area near the main road would be perfect accessible, but without interfering with your privacy." The project grew quickly, attracting the attention of social investors and the local government, which saw it as an innovative solution for the region's aging population. With Paul's help for legal matters, Vanessa for social aspects, and an architect specializing in senior design, the plans for the Resilience Village began to take shape. "I like the name," Linda commented during one of the planning meetings. It reminds us that aging well is an act of resistance in a society that tries to make us invisible. Amid all these developments, I received a surprising call from Daniel. It was the first time he had contacted me directly since his visit. "Emily," he began hesitantly, "I hope I'm not bothering you." "You're not Daniel. What can I do for you?" "Actually, I'm calling to offer help. I heard about the Resilience Village project through the girls. I work with systems development now and thought I could contribute by creating a digital platform to connect residents with each other and with local services." The offer took me completely by surprise. "Why would you do that?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Because I need to do something to make up for the harm I caused, not just to you or Sarah, but to restore my own sense of dignity. And because it's a project that would benefit people like my own parents, who are now aging without having planned adequately." After consulting with Sarah and the others involved in the project, we accepted Daniel's offer. He would be a remote collaborator developing the digital system without needing direct involvement with the project's administration. It was a small gesture of reconciliation, not complete. Maybe it never would be, but a recognition that people can change, and that reparation, even if imperfect, has value. When the third anniversary of my move to the cabin arrived, we celebrated not only my personal journey, but also the start of construction on the Resilience Village. The groundbreaking ceremony brought together people from all over the region, hopeful seniors, supportive family members, professionals dedicated to the cause. I was invited to give a short speech, something that would have terrified me a few years earlier. But now, with the confidence that comes from lived experience and the certainty of one's own worth, I felt comfortable in front of the small audience. When I bought this cabin at 65, I thought I was looking for a place to hide from the world, I began. A refuge where I could finally live in peace without the demands of others. What I didn't realize was that I was in fact beginning the most important journey of my life. I looked at the faces around me. Sarah, the girls, Paul, Vanessa, Michael, Linda, and so many others who had become part of my life in these years. The real gift of my retirement was not the solitude I sought, but the community I found when I finally learned to set healthy boundaries, when I understood that valuing myself was not selfishness, but the necessary foundation for genuine relationships. I pointed to the model of the future Resilience Village displayed near the ceremony site. This project represents everything I learned on this journey: that independence does not mean isolation, that aging with dignity is a right, not a privilege, and that even in our golden years, we can still create, build, transform not only our own lives, but also the world around us. The small audience applauded warmly. I noticed tears in many eyes, not of sadness, but of recognition, hope, and possibility. Later that night, as everyone celebrated with food and music in the large clearing we had prepared, I found a moment of tranquility on my cabin porch. The sun was setting slowly, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the same colors I had admired on that first day 3 years ago. Leah, now 15, and showing signs of the strong woman she would become, found me there. "Are you okay, Grandma? You seem thoughtful." "I'm great, dear. Just reflecting on how life takes unexpected turns." She sat next to me, both of us watching the sunset in a comfortable silence. "Do you know what I admire most about you, Grandma?" she finally asked. "It's not just that you defended your dream, but that you allowed it to grow and change to include other people." Her words touched me deeply with their wisdom beyond her years. "Maybe that's what it really means to age well," I replied after a moment. "Not just holding on to what we planned, but remaining open to new dreams, new beginnings." "Like the Resilience Village," she observed. "Exactly. A dream I never imagined having born from circumstances that initially seemed only painful." We sat there until the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, silent witnesses to the improbable journey that had brought me here. It wasn't the quiet retirement I had imagined during those long years of hospital shifts. It was something more complex, more challenging, richer in experiences and human connections than I could have ever planned. The cabin I had defended with such determination was no longer just a refuge from the world, but a starting point for a new phase of engagement with it. On my own terms, with clear boundaries and a renewed purpose. As I watched the celebration lights in the distance with the distant sound of laughter and conversation, I felt a deep gratitude for Sarah and her courage, for the girls and their fresh view of the world, for every person who had crossed my path in these last few years, contributing to the rich and complex tapestry my life had become. And I felt gratitude even for the crisis that almost cost me everything, because without it I might never have discovered the strength that always existed within me, waiting for the right moment to flourish. Now, if you liked this story, click subscribe, and tell me in the comments which part left you speechless. Oh, and don't forget to become a member to get access to exclusive videos. I don't post here. I'll see you there.